All right. Hello. Welcome to Data Access Roundtable Conversation. Joining me is Ian Barker and Miguel Angel Moreno. So, hello. Long time no
Hello.
talk.
Hello, Jim.
All right,
Hello,
so
Ian.
hello. So, if anybody has any questions on data access in any shapes and many shapes and forms when it comes to Delphi, C++, Builder, Rad Studio, put those in the chat window here, and we'll do our best to get them answered. I'm going to open it up, though. Miguel had some questions earlier about multi-threaded data access when you're like adding data access to a server that is going to have each request coming in on its own thread, and like how the best way to handle that is. And I wasn't sure if you maybe had some thoughts you might add to the conversation around that.
Well, the best way to go is always to have this saying, because you have many options in Delphi. If you are handling, you have also DB Express, which are also multi-threaded enabled. But this is the key thing. Database component out there is multi-threading ready. That's the key thing. D is not. So that for sure don't use in multi-threading. DB Express is, and try to follow the guidelines, because as in any multi-threading environment, there's some rules blindly to do everything. So in FireDAC, as long as you have set up the components to be running in a thread, and they are isolated in its own thread, then no problem. The problem is when you start maybe using access to the main thread variables of your main application, which is fairly common. Events to the components, and that is a little catch when you need to be very. Point being is when you use either FireDAC or DB Express, I will focus on FireDAC for us. You can use them in the main thread, which is the standard way most of us usually use them. Hence, if you want, like when open or close on whatever, those are on your main form or in your data model. If you are adding them to a thread, then that method doesn't work anymore. Meaning you need to manually create the events and hook them up to your own handlers that also must be handled. This is the catch. You use the same component, you have the same events available, them with thread ready available methods rather than the standard get created automatically by the IDE. That is the only catch. But other than that, they're ready for multi-threading. They internally have the logic to don't share global variables. They have some internal locking and semaphore. I think that's already being taken care of. But we must do our own due diligence when using them up. That's the point. From the we must also be thread aware, or as developers. So you don't part of us. We need to be thread aware when you are both using the component or the client environment, and anything that is calling the component must be done like that. Synchronization needs to be done between your thread. To at one point in time, one definitely the FireDAC component is done querying or posting or whatever rules. But the one handling the component, the one that's actually checking the is your working.
Yeah. Okay.
In FireDAC, we can check on those later. Yeah.
Okay. Your audio was breaking up a little bit. I think I was able to follow most of that. I think that's a good point, though, that you said about that. Even when you're using the thread-aware components, that you need to still take responsibility for that. And this is, I think, actually becoming a more interesting thing when we're seeing the new. And I'm going off in a rabbit hole now, but I'll bring it back. The news about like ChatGPT and these things now that will automatically write code for you. And everybody's like, oh my goodness, developers are going to be obsolete. It's like, no, there's still going to be somebody that's going to be the person that says, okay, yeah, the code that came out of there, that'll work. And I'm going to get behind it and commit to that. And that's really going to be
that's like saying having a high-level language makes programmers obsolete because we're used to code in assembly language. I mean, if ChatGPT helps us write programs, then it could be an evolution of a high-level language. It's just a higher level language. I don't think that. I mean, yeah, the job may change, and see, now I've gone off on your rabbit hole as well. But the job may change, but I don't think it will necessarily eradicate the job altogether. It just may make it evolve, and also it seems like there's some controversy around you know, how it produces the code in the first place as well. So, but yeah, the time is coming when Star Trek computer is going to be a reality, Jim. You know, we like that idea.
yeah, but there'll still be a computer. There'll still be someone that has to be the brains that says yes, this makes sense, and know how to put together. And yeah, this is something that's been happening for a while, and there are a lot of people that do see high-level languages even as a threat to programmers. And it's like, no, it just makes us more productive and get more done. But there's still a lot of work for us to do.
Now, there's another way. Jay forgot, but there is another way. Very neat feature by FireDAC is even the query. You still have 4 options when they are executing the queries. The normal way is blocking for you right away, and that's what most users normally. But another way to go more threaded, this is like at the intermediate level. If you don't want to do the full control of your threads, whatever, simply drop all your FireDAC query components, change the execution asynchronous. That way you need to define the callback method, which is also on the events. You will call your event. Now, what happens here is that all your FireDAC queries that you in a module, you can then, in theory, launch them to execute separately. There is some part of main code that runs in the same thread, but the actual execution of waiting for the server will be done asynchronously. So this is like an easy way to go semi. What we're doing is that the actual wait from the server is not blocking in your main thread. And the only case on those scenarios when you have different queries and you don't want each one to block each other. Server scenario, you don't want that. In a server scenario, you have user session. Session may be running the same query on the same component and a totally unknown time. You must go multi-threaded. There's another alternative when threaded frameworks. Most notably, when you are, like, for example, running the good old, what's the name of it? Many of them, the data modules that they provide you with is not the standard data module. It's actually by user session created data module. So the one that you're designing, like IntraWeb, the one you are designing on is actually, because as each user logs in into your running IntraWeb application, the frame, the one that you were using in the IDE, and create a clone belonging to that specific thread, specific scenario, the framework is helping you. So everything the IDE is not the code that will run. Each user session will will get a clone of that form module. Then this is another way to go, but we are changing the framework. This is not the standard VCL. This is not. You're using another alternative framework that is doing all that heavy work for you in the back, heavy work and cloning the data module, cloning exactly with the same components and assigning additional things, due to things like handling the user got to do it. That is the heavy work of threading for you, or you just do using asynchronous calls. But in that, you are not using the same component. You have different queries. That this is a difference.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in here. Actually, here's one that just came in from Alf. Alf's always good for a question. Let's see here. there will get far more work in order to identify new or high-level components like Java new bugs and new not I didn't care features. Yeah. Yep. Always it makes more work more than it takes. I mean, there certainly is some work that goes away, so people lose their jobs, but it does always continue to make more work. There were some questions earlier also about the speed differences between DB Express and FireDAC. And I know generally I'm reluctant to say one is faster than the other because it's always going to come down to particular use cases. I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on that, or if you would be the same thing. It depends on the use cases, or if there's certain situations where you found one to be faster than the other, for example.
It just happens to be that I run such kind of benchmark right exactly after FireDAC was acquired, which were still coexisting. So at that time, there was a big question. If I want to migrate from DB Express, where do I go to? DAC or DIC from the other guys? So there was a thing by moving out. So the quickest is to recall all these benchmarks. I need to update them up. Clear difference, not huge, but the key difference was even DB Express oriented. The key point here was the overhead on little, very, very often in closed loops, which is common for OTL applications, line transaction applications, like those are posting records sequentially. You are on records very often in a production environment with, let's say, above 100 or 200 users. It's a small penalty, but noticeable in the end by using DB Express just because the factor component. The DB Express relies on an externally created DLL. That DLL still just connects to the final OD. You have the Delphi side of the component of DB Express, which has like a base to access the component. Then you have the actual DLL that has the specific logic code. And then that DLL made in C, C++ is the one that finally connects to the. So this additional interim layer does have a penalty when you have very close loop action processing. For big querying, for report creation, for those kinds of penalties really disappears. But in closely run, very small queries, we could really see that. And then there's an additional thing. Even FireDAC is purely done, and that caching method seems to be a bit much better. The algorithm in the caching is much better than DB Express. When you're running the exact same query with the exact same parameters, then the wiser to represent that and then make the database component that, and then the cache result give you the cache results quicker from the server. The server have an internal caching level to detect whether the SQL that you are sending to them exactly the same, or if something changed that is minor, they will reuse it gave you the previous time as much as possible. But in order for that logic to work, it must know what are the rules that the server observes to say, oh yeah, this is very similar to the query result. Otherwise, they will say, no, I need to discard it and run a brand new completely. We could detect that the FireDAC component was better fine-tuned to make the reality of some of the query results. So yes, there was a penalty, and I do recall on the result, on very good 5 up to 20% higher performance with FireDAC. And the caching depends on your actual kind of queries, but there was a higher percentage of hitting a cache and getting versus using DB Express.
Yeah. And it also, of course, if you're using client-server databases, it's down to the actual client-server side. Because actually, when I showed installing MySQL, server, there's some default configurations you can choose. One is for developer, one is for server, and then one is what they call a multi-use. Oh no, actually dedicated, I think is the other version. And what happens is, if you choose developer, it configures the MySQL server with a minimal set of memory use and caching and all the rest of it. If you choose server, then it uses more memory use and allows it to use more processor affinity, so it can do multitasking better, and a much bigger cache and much bigger query cache and all the rest of it. And if you choose dedicated, then it just takes over the whole machine. And if you didn't know that and you chose a default, then you'd be wondering why machine A is that much slower than another machine for the same queries. And that's quite an important definition, is when you're talking about client-server databases, it's the server's configuration that is as important. Also, the method of communication. If it's MySQL, then you are talking across the Ethernet network or Wi-Fi or something like that. You've got packets going around that network, you know, on port 3306 or something like that. If that network is very, very busy or faulty, which is something that happens quite a lot, you get lots of ACKs and resends on the packets. It doesn't matter whether you're using DB Express or FireDAC or anything else. If that server is you know, not very efficiently configured, you know, if it's got problems with configuration, then it's going to affect the performance. And so many people come to us and say, "Oh, we're copying a Word document and it's always fine. We copied a Word document, we never have any problems. But look, your system won't work." Well, yes, your Word document takes a big chunk, throws it down the pipeline, and takes another chunk from the disk space and throws it down the pipeline, and it does it all in one big transaction. When you've got a database connection, it could be running for several hours and sometimes several days, depending on what you've got. We actually we do pings and keep alives and reconnects and things like that. But the connection that you're making to a database server is not the same as the performance that you're going to get copying a file around. And it really pains me when I hear people try and you know, talk about tweaking a database's performance based on you know, using it like a file server, and yeah, that's when we start to walk away from their network and say, okay, then you do your thing and we'll do ours. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Miguel, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Jan. But I think what Jan says is very, very, your server configuration counts a lot. Just changing one small, stupid parameter that makes a big difference sometimes in some specific scenarios. So you also must do your due diligence. If in many cases, our users or Delphi developers, you don't control that. Meaning, if you're in a corporate, there's an IT department and a dedicated DBA that's the only one that can touch the server. Find it that it's not the best scenario. You either convince him that the setting you're proposing, you just need to live with it. And in other words, you need to do the tweaking on your side as a Delphi developer can with your components. In this case, talking FireDAC or whatever or whatnot. And in those, the answer I'm giving is assuming that you cannot touch the server. If you can, then yeah, you can. Of course, you can explore further and try to optimize the server. But if you can, if you're on the server, that's as far as you can go. You can only play with the database components as much as you can. I do recall another thing, and I do recall the good technology. It had this big disadvantage for the Delphi developers, layer of finding the final DB client being built in the middle. It made it very, very difficult for debugging, or because the moment it touches the DLL, you lose the visibility of what in DB Express. Sorry, but in FireDAC, being a Delphi component, then you can go query of the database server, and in many cases that has helped. In my personal lot, to debug and fine-tune FireDAC a way that DB Express never reached. There were still some minor bugs there that got never resolved. It could actually debug the performance of the server. So I remember some of us in the Delphi groups were some patches and workarounds on the known issues of the DBX, which in FireDAC basically you don't see them because both the developers that in the next version of the revision of FireDAC you get all those bugs. So I think that also helped. It's a hidden fact that we as the Delphi developers, necessarily someone outside of our world, having a component made 100% in Delphi help it not only for using it, but also for fine-tuning and making it robust and work perfectly.
Yeah.
There's a comment here I really like. I'm going to share for one of the attendees.
Oh, I was going to talk about Alf, but that's okay. Carry on.
Go ahead.
It's Alf, who is one of our frequent flyers, as we like to call him. He's a big fan of these conferences. He was just saying that he felt that DB Express was a huge catastrophe, which made several others extra grey hair. My days of having grey hair are gone. I used to have hair, and now I just have memories. But changing to FireDAC solved this for him, and it made his app go 1,000 times faster. It depends, Alpha. I don't want to say, yeah, maybe. We did some tests as well, and yes, we did find in our scenario, FireDAC 99 times out of 100 was much quicker than DB Express, but it was a very well-defined use case for what we wanted to do. The DB Express for some other things was quicker just because it was easier for the developers to work with DB Express, and there's just familiarity they had. But again, as Miguel was saying, it might be also to do with the DLLs and the configuration and the fact that FireDAC is Delphi, made in Delphi, and that there's a lot of moving parts, and the moving parts all add up into the whole, which is the really thing that I was saying about the server is, it's no good having a Porsche if you live out in the countryside and the roads are made out of mud, because your Porsche will go the same speed as a tractor, maybe slower, So it really is down to what the health of the server and the network is as well, and the convenience. DB Express is not always going to be the solution because of the extra overhead of installing components and things like that. So yeah.
So I was going to mention this comment here about, it says something has more features than something that only works fast. Fast is not any better. So there are some use cases. So there was the session earlier today. Yeah, was it Jans that was doing it on the Labs research on how to speed up your code 10 to 100 times faster, whatever it was?
Yeah, Yanis. It was Yanis Makovshek, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's one of those things. Sometimes speed is exactly the feature you need. Speed is a feature, but is not the only feature. But one of the things I love about FireDAC is the breadth of the features in there. There's so many cool things in FireDAC, and I honestly probably don't even know a tenth of them. But like the local SQL support, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times in the past I wished I had a solution for that, to do local SQL.
So many other Delphi developers say exactly the same thing. Oh, I love FireDAC. And actually, I came to FireDAC quite late because I was using other technologies and other components. But yeah, I have to say I'm not an all-out fanboy of FireDAC, but I've used it, and I've used it in some projects that are out there live. I do like the direct access MySQL components based on the session I was talking about earlier on, but I've used FireDAC for lots of other things as well, and it's got some very clever things in the implementation. The way it works is quite novel in some ways. The update and the CRUD, create, read, update. The way that FireDAC handles that is very clever, I think. Kerry Jensen, he's a big fan of FireDAC and written a lot about it. And in fact, last time Kerry Jensen and I spoke, I think it was messaging. It was to do with the MySQL driver. Funnily enough. He was having problems, and that man can teach me anything he likes about FireDAC, but I actually helped him with something else. So there you go. I don't think he solved it in the end. Actually, I'm not even sure if he did, but there you go. Yeah. So there you go.
I was just going to link out to his book, but I can't get to his website right now. He has a book that I believe goes into FireDAC. But yeah, FireDAC is a good combination, I think, of speed and features. It certainly has a lot of both. And I remember actually Kerry talking about a specific scenario where he had a customer that was using an older version of FireDAC, and they were running into some issues. And he came on and he's like, "Well, let's go ahead and try, the latest version of FireDAC," and that had a huge speed improvement for him and fixed the bugs he had as well.
I actually have a little what's the word we use for them? Not a test case, what do you call them? An example of a real life example of Delphi being used. We have an external some external developers we've been working with, and they have a web-based project that they're writing, and they use Entity Framework in the background, which is a C# thing. And I wrote the glue logic between a server that collects hundreds and hundreds of time clocks data, and my glue logic does some manipulation and then sends it on to their server. And I wrote the Delphi program in about 4 hours, and we tested it, and it worked. And we pumped through plenty of transactions just to prove that it would work. Because, when you've got 100 companies with 100 staff all clocking in and out at the same time on some business, that's a lot of data gets pushed through, within about 15 minutes, because people tend to come to work roughly the same time if they're all on the same shift. So we were fairly confident it worked. So we pumped it up to this company, and I shan't name them, but because they're actually very good. But we pumped it up, and we pumped that through 7,500 transactions in something like 10 seconds. It wasn't much for us because we handle millions of transactions. Their server crashed, and they're going, yes, there's a problem. I said, I don't mean to be funny, but you have had this in production, right? And an Entity Framework could not manage it. It was quite remarkable, really. And Delphi, of course, is the strength of Delphi is the robustness of Delphi when it's dealing with databases and it's dealing with running as a Windows service, which this little glue app does. Was able to chug along and pump up thousands of transactions in not many seconds into this server. And the poor web server in this Entity Framework at the other end just went into a big heap and fell over. And by the way, it took them a week, I think, to write their version, the other end, which was comparable amount of code. So if you want a real world case study, a couple of hours for the Delphi stuff and a week from someone who knew what he was doing to write the same code. So fast is actually important in that scenario for us, but it has to be accurate because it's human resources and time and attendance. It's no good if the data fails to get up there. Then there's actually a problem, a real world problem for the people's payroll. People won't get paid. So it's actually quite important that data gets processed accurately and arrives, and I can say it's definitely arrived in the database and got there. But also speed is very important because we could be pummeling through thousands of transactions, and it's no good if each transaction takes a second to process. 1,000 seconds is way too long. In that particular scenario, we need an answer for those people clocking in within seconds of them actually doing it, almost near real time. And the only thing that could be quicker than Delphi would be C++, probably. I think Python, definitely not. Yeah, I don't think unless they were using Python for Delphi and had the Delphi part of it. Anyway, so there you go. I digress. I have too many anecdotes and not enough real knowledge.
May I share there?
Yes.
About is read of Delphi. We're talking about multi-threading. We're talking about the express versus framework with a thread ready or not. But we're talking about very fancy things. Most of the times, what I have found out with users and customers that get is the basic understanding of how SQL servers work, and I come to the notes that I almost always implement because they haven't done. Is there's a difference. Many people need to understand that the SQL server, when you send the raw SQL command, the whole text query or whatnot you're doing, the server is not immediately smart. It's a text command that you are sending over your network to the internet or a web service. The server has to finally parse the command to understand what you understand. Now, most of the time, it's seamless to us. It takes it's like when you are running closed loop transactions, like in a production environment, it does count the actual execution time of having multiple transactions of the same level running, mainly in OLT, online transaction processing, which is closed loops of file processing, add, update, delete, whatever. There is where the hit on performance of just sending the raw command. The point is, once you have all SQL servers out there in the market, all of them, even MySQL, send me your command, let me parse it completely, have it pre-compile, and you only send me the different parameters of this SQL, execute them up. Then the only thing you need to update is the actual value of the parameters, be it a query, be it an update, be it whatever. All SQL servers, and of course, FireDAC is ready. You send the command, and then you call, instead of calling call execute, it just sends the whole text as is every single time. Your network bandwidth, if this execution is taken in a closed loop, then every time you're sending and it's taking time to the server to actually parse and execute. FireDAC method, whereas you fill the component with your SQL command, and then every time send new parameters, you call prepare. And on prepare, it change the actual parameters, and then you call execute. And the only need to change the actual parameter. The difference in execution time is sometimes, especially when you have big sets, because you are eliminating the part. But again, this many people, I don't know what, don't get this. Has nothing to actually be on Delphi or FireDAC. Has to do with the understanding of how SQL servers work. And the point is to support this. So you try to do all the processing only once. Queries that are template-based queries. You never change the query. You're only changing the actual parameter of when you are querying a report, that the query, the whole text never changes. Then this will where it doesn't work, if like in some custom reports that you change the full extension of the SQL because the report itself requires, then it won't work. But those are like a specific report. You don't care if the parsing takes 1 second. But on OELT transactions, closed loop. So this is a point that sometimes we need to explain the Delphi users. Yes, would you have the FireDAC, but you also need to understand how these things work in order to help you optimize them, ready for you to help you with it. That you need to understand.
So what I think you're discussing then is you're really talking about the optimization of the things that you do with the components. So what you're describing is parameterized queries, and saying that parameterized queries are quicker, which is very true, because obviously the server knows how to plug in the differences much more efficiently than preparing the whole query from scratch again and compiling it and optimizing it and working out a query plan and all the rest of it. And the other thing is things like static fields on databases, rather than doing field by name or that kind of thing, because all of these little tweaks add up to speed, and the speed is important, but it's not as the person commenting earlier said, it's not the only thing. It's no good being very fast and wrong. You need to be fast and right, and that's the key thing. And what you're saying is about parameterized queries. The other thing is not using a table control unless you absolutely have to, because table control is doing a lot more, and it's really in some ways supporting a legacy way of looking at data, for good reasons. But if you are writing code that is going to be doing something like a ORM type thing, if you start using tables to write data back and read data, unless you've got a very good reason for that, it will be a lot slower, because there is a big overhead on what tables do. You know, they're not optimized for certain things. With MySQL components, there is on the MySQL DAC, there's a .execute function on the database component. So you say my database, whatever it is .execute, and it can execute raw SQL. For update queries, it's extremely fast, because it doesn't have any of the extra, you know, baggage that comes with a T-query component or a T-table component. But these are things that are general optimizations, I think, that apply to any database. And FireDAC does do a lot of those behind the scenes, at least when I've looked at the code myself to see what it did. You know, well, how does it do this? Is it better? I could see there was a lot going on. It's great component set, but I don't feel like I know enough about it yet to be able to say, do this or do that. But generalize things like parameterizing queries, using array inserts if you're going to insert data. There's different ways of inserting data in SQL databases that are much quicker than trying to insert an individual record in a loop. If you do that, you're going to pull your machine down, and the server's going to take forever coming back, because it's got to respond and say, yeah, I did that. What now what do you want me to do? I've done that. Now what do you want me to do? You know, whereas with a big array, it goes, thank you for all that, and now I've done it. And it's that whole conversation is a little bit quicker, I think.
Yeah. So
yeah,
comment here. That's why you're.
Yeah, that was the person that mentioned it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to the again, the session this morning, which we just said his name and I can't remember. My brain is really tired. Long end of the day.
Yanis Makov.
Yes.
Yanis
From Do Research. Yeah.
Yanis, I think it's easier.
He was saying that really you have to find where your bottleneck is. Where's the problem? What's slowing you down? And then once you do that, then you can speed that up. And it reminds me of the woodworker's adage of measure twice, cut once, right? And it's the same thing, you know, with development. It's like, oh, should I switch to this database framework or this? It's like, I don't know. Where's your bottleneck? You know, if you're on a really slow network connection, probably not going to make a big difference. Or if you're not already using parameterized queries and all those things like Miguel and you just talked about, you know, you could try using those in DB Express first and see if that fixes the problem. But likewise, if you are using those in DB Express and then you switch to FireDAC and don't use those, it might be slower. So you have to really, you know, understand the whole situation, which of course we always want to have the easy answers, but unfortunately that's not.
It's the big picture optimization thing, isn't it? You know, it's the great thing about computing is there's more than one way to do everything. The bad thing about computing is there's more than one way to do everything. Yeah, yeah. You know, it's a nightmare.
And there is.
We must.
Go ahead.
We must say that there is some. I mean, let's be realistic. DB Express technology for the components, but it's kind of aged now, and I understand that, and it's now on FireDAC, so we all understand that. I see today that the people still using DB Express, big projects that were developed with it, so that's a fact of life. But we're talking only really old, but still out there, like the good old database provider was the way DB Express used when connecting to application servers. Technology along with DB Express, and I do recall from all the provider components, the original was mostly developed in C and C++, including the T client dataset. And the component to use to hold data in memory and not on a database it's very good old client data set. But then FireDAC came in with its own version, FDIF-MEM. And some of the things that many of us notice projects is that with big amount of records, when you are like over 100,000, was a big difference between FireDAC and the good old client data set. And finally, block entry about it, because they found out that the original C code exponentially slower at around that threshold. Of course, you started to find them in the T-client dataset and started to slow down to a crawl, and then consistent. So the way FireDAC is done, it's order n. It engineers to work well, regardless of the size of the records. T-client dataset had that it had to do with the memory manager. Again, Marco Cantu's entry was very good about perform very bad in allocating new blocks once you leak size of the data set. So you could see that it paid off to immediately invest as much as you could in your own developer time from DB Express to FireDAC. Because again, this is things that when it passed, and we're talking technology, the client data set is from the end of the 90s. It's been in there, but somehow it's a frozen technology. It's not being developed anymore. So on those big technology improvement on the newer components, then even if you're in the legacy mode, to move over to bring back performance when something is already hitting you in your.
Yep.
So
and I was going to say that, like it was mentioned earlier, that Python wouldn't be fast enough. I've discovered that you can make things fast in Python and you can make things slow in Delphi or C++ or C whatever. So yeah, it's fun to poke fun at other languages, but you can make bad things.
Python's an excellent language, and it does some really cool things, but it, for example, very tight for next loops and doing things like that, and is not its strength, and it's not designed to be fast in those scenarios at the moment. And you know, it's like trying to use a screwdriver to eat your food. You know, you can do it, but it's the wrong tool. You know, with Python, what it is good at is it's many other things, and it's very good at those things, which is one of the reasons why Embarcadero have got an interest in you know, some crossover between Delphi and Python. But when it comes to databases, yeah, they've got some interesting functions in Python to handle databases as well. Maps.
It's a matter of choosing the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
There's another thing, just before we forget about this, is something I noticed about Shines with Express, because so far we've been talking in things that are provided by both, only in some on the polishness or the robustness, but there are some things that really you only have in DB Express. One of them is the SQL editor in FireDAC, which is borrowed, BDE. You never had that on DB Express, now you have it. And also the editor, all that you have in FireDAC. You have the SQL monitor, which is a very dynamically ad hoc to your own client, and then you run the external tool to monitor your SQL that was never available in DB Express. And there's another features that come in handy with heterogeneous SQL servers, which happens many times in the corporate environment. You can write one single SQL that can your SQL server, your Oracle, MySQL, whatnot. FireDAC will make sure to each native version of each one of them. And this is a function that I also found in, like, I'm not aware of it. And they go to the old style of dynamically changing the SQL, the server they want to connect to. Whereas FireDAC has this native functionality. You use the macros. There's tons of functions already predefined in FireDAC, and you can also define your own. This is macro function. That means this function will be replaced with native version of each one of those single, writing one single SQL command in FireDAC. So this, and also the script command is very, very underutilized in many of my environments I found, and they still run. It is provided by each one of the servers. But the beauty of the FireDAC one is that the SQL console, since it understands all of them, then you have one single engine that you can dynamically change to connect single environment. These are so powerful and very hard to do in the old days with your external shell script, a batch file or a shell script on Unix or Linux, a tool from each one of the vendors, and you have some glue logic in your shell script. You just run one single SQL script command in your FireDAC and it connects to all of them. Kind of things that really, really you get with FireDAC and you will never had before in Belgium.
Cool.
All right. Well, I know it's a little early here, but I think. Oh, that's good to hear. So Yilmaz just shared that the apparently YouTube stream is going better than the Facebook stream. So if you're on the Facebook stream and might join the YouTube stream tomorrow. But
You probably need to be
using.
Probably you need to be using VR on Facebook. That's why you need some big headset or something. We're all space monkeys on Facebook or something, or Meta. Yeah.
Or
I think we need to do for our next session will be in VR.
Oh, that would be so cool, Jim. We would have to wear helmets as well.
All right. Well, I was going to suggest we go ahead and wrap up. Oh, go ahead, Miguel.
No. Good.
Oh, okay. I was going to suggest
said you on one.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we go ahead and wrap up. Not a lot of questions coming in, and I think we've been interesting, good conversation. So thank you, Miguel and Ian, for being here. And Miguel, you have a session tomorrow morning. I think Ian, you have another session tomorrow too, don't you?
I do, and I'm still editing it, so correct. It's going to be ready. I've recorded it. I just need to finish editing it. Yeah. I'm just making Martha very, very nervous. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Just in time delivering. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yes. Well, I'm a busy boy. What can I say? Yeah.
No. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. So there's a question here about the Community Edition. Community Edition is typically one full version behind the current professional shipping paid edition. So there is not a 11.x version of Community Edition yet. There's a 10.04 or 10.4. So my expectation would be is that when Delphi 12 comes out, then there will be a Community Edition 11 release. But not any official announcement around that, just saying it's typically a full version behind. So that's when you can expect that to come out. And with that, thank you again. And we will encourage everybody to join us tomorrow morning for the Miguel sessions. First of all, technology preview, processing XML documents with XML Mapper, which I am really excited to see this because I know that's something that's been worked on quite a bit and a lot of great new features coming in the update for XML Mapper. So fantastic. Great. We'll talk to take care, everybody. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll see you all tomorrow. Yeah. Hope you all can join us.
Bye. Okay. Bye, everybody.